Thank you to the Midnight Stars. My name is Jim Worley, and I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety
Hi,
date.
Jim.
Hi, Jim.
Hi, Jim. Hi, Jim. Hi, hi.
Hi, Jim. Hi.
Hi, Jim.
My
I'm sorry.
sobriety date is March 5th, 1989. My home group is the First Things First group of Alcoholics Anonymous. I have to do something. Can you see everything on the screen?
Yes.
Yes, yes, yes.
Everything there? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. All right, today we're going to do an overview. I'm sorry, I have to do another adjustment here. I usually do this before the meeting starts, but I have to. There we go. All right, here we go. All right, we're going to do an overview of AA prehistory. The things that came before AA, but AA borrowed or stole a lot of things from a lot of other people that came before. We're just going to talk about some of the people and the organizations that came before AA that helped in the founding of AA. The information that I present today comes from a lot of different books, history books, and I hope you will enjoy the presentation and hopefully learn something. Alcoholics Anonymous did not drop down from the sky fully formed. And that is now clear from the historical narrative. There were so many different people that influenced Alcoholics Anonymous. Dr. Silkworth and Dr. Jung and William James and the Oxford group and a lot of these, a lot of other people. Alcoholics Anonymous was not the only therapy for alcoholics that there was going on in the time. Other approaches to treating alcoholism with similar methods came before AA, and AA borrowed a lot from these previous influences, because nothing comes out of nothing. AA was not created. Bill Wilson said it is a synthetic gadget. It's something that we put together. And so is it prehistory or is it AA history? Bill said in the Toronto Convention in 1965, Bill said, "People say that Dr. Bob's and my meeting was the beginning of AA, but this is not really so. In my view, AA really began before that, in Switzerland." If you'll remember on page 26 of the big book in English, it says, "A certain American businessman had ability, good sense, and high character. For years, he had floundered from one sanitarium to another. He had consulted the best-known American psychiatrists. Then he had gone to Europe, placing himself in the care of a celebrated physician, the psychiatrist Dr. Jung, who prescribed for him. Nevertheless, he was drunk in a short time. In 1926, Roland Hazard was treated by Dr. Carl Gustav Jung in Zurich, Switzerland. He was a patient for about a year, probably less than a year. He sobered up and then returned to drinking. He was treated a second time by Carl Jung, and Roland was told that there was no medical or psychological hope for an alcoholic of his type. His only hope was a vital spiritual or religious experience. This is just a picture of Dr. Carl Jung in 1930. The other psychiatrists, Freud and Adler, didn't believe in anything spiritual. Carl Jung believed in something spiritual. So we've read that Roland was that certain American businessman that's in the big book, was Roland Hazard, and these happened in about 1926. The story in the big book is intended to demonstrate the total inefficacy of human power, that psychiatry and psychoanalysis really can't help. And Carl Jung, as a psychologist, was looking to religion or spirituality to help us alcoholics. According to correspondence and letters between Roland Hazard and his cousin, Hazard had daily sessions with Carl Jung in Zurich over several months and stopped drinking. However, after an alcoholic relapse during a trip to Africa, Hazard was brought back to Jung as the court of last resort. Further down there in white, it says, it might seem strange for a physician to prescribe a spiritual experience, but it is consistent with Carl Jung's background and interest. Bill Wilson has been acknowledged to have skills in the crafting of tales. He was a storyteller. And Bill Wilson told this story of how psychiatry and medicine are not enough for us to get sober. And in another book, it says that the first indication that Roland was also, after Carl Jung, he was also seeing Courtney Baylor. Remember that name? Courtney Baylor as a therapist later on. He went to see Carl Jung. He relapsed. He went to see Jung again. He kept relapsing off and on again, and he went to see Courtney Baylor. We'll talk about him later. Courtney Baylor had a good reputation as a lay therapist who worked with alcoholics. He was not the first person to treat Roland. Roland Hazard struggled with alcoholism for much of his life. He never joined A.A. He was active in the Oxford group and a pioneering spiritual response to the disease. He played an important and well-known role in the founding of Alcoholics Anonymous because he's the one who passed the message of a spiritual experience to E.e.య, and then E.e.య passed it on to Bill. So Roland was active in the Calvary Episcopal Church in New York City until he died in December 20th of 1945. In 1961, Bill Wilson wrote a letter to Carl Jung. And in the letter, he says, "This letter of great appreciation has been long overdue. I want to introduce myself as Bill W., co-founder of the Society of Alcoholics Anonymous. Though you have surely heard of us, I doubt you are aware that a certain conversation you once had with one of your patients, a Mr. Roland H., back in 1930s, played a critical role in the founding of our fellowship." So Bill always claimed that Carl Jung, the psychologist, had a lot to do. In the 1961 letter to Carl Jung, Bill expresses his gratitude for Jung's long ago message to Roland Hazard, who was treated by Jung and who would later lead friend E.e.య Thatcher to the Oxford group. Bill said, "You frankly told Roland of the hopelessness of further medical or psychiatric treatment, and also of the possibility of a spiritual awakening or religious experience. In short, a genuine conversion." Carl Jung said that Roland's craving for alcohol was the equivalent on a low level of the spiritual thirst for our being for wholeness, expressed in medieval language, the union with God. This was in a letter. After Bill wrote the letter to Jung, Carl Jung answered the letter and told this to Bill. He told Bill that the only way to cure spirits, alcohol, is with the Spirit. After writing that letter to Bill, Carl Jung died in June of 1961. Here is an interesting conversation that Dr. Jung had with one of his patients. Dr. Jung said, "You are suffering from a loss of faith in God and in a future life." The patient said, "But Dr. Jung, do you believe these doctrines are true?" Dr. Jung said, "That's no business of mine if they're true or not. I'm a doctor, not a priest. I can only tell you that if you recover your faith, you will get well. If you don't, you won't." So faith in something is what Carl Jung said that you had to have. Some other predecessors and influencers on AA are, number one, the Emmanuel movement. Number two, The Common Sense of Drinking, a book by Richard Peabody. Number three, the Jacobi movement. Number four, William James. And number five, Emmett Fox and New Thought. The Emmanuel movement started in 1906 at Boston's Emmanuel Church, and they began a free clinic providing medical and mental health care for the disadvantaged. The two founders, Worcester and his younger associate Samuel McComb, were clergymen, but with doctorates in psychology. They influenced the rise of psychiatry in Europe, the principles of Christian Science, Darwin, and the American psychologist William James. So here, these were ministers. Worcester and Samuel McComb were ministers, but they combined it with psychology to try and help alcoholics. And they wrote a lot of books and worked with a lot of alcoholics. This movement, the Emmanuel movement, was reported in the press, and Worcester and McComb became well known for their success with alcoholics. Now, there in white, you can see in 1913, Courtney Baylor, remember that name? He worked with Roland, began to work for the Emmanuel Church as a specialist in alcoholism. He was probably the first paid alcoholism therapist in the country. Originally, he sold insurance, and he'd come to Worcester in 1911 for help with his drinking problem. So he was an alcoholic, and he was one of the first alcoholics to start working with other alcoholics. It's a picture of Courtney Baylor, and he actually wrote a book called Remaking a Man, a successful method of mental change, mental refitting. Courtney Baylor had both Roland Hazard and Richard Peabody as his patients, and was thus an important indirect influence on early Alcoholics Anonymous. We'll get to Richard Peabody in a minute. Here, there in the letters, white letters, the therapist attempted to inspire his client to develop an entirely new outlook on life, very similar to a sponsor in AA. A new scale of values. These ideas are entirely compatible with AA's conceptions of spiritual awakening or psychic change. The therapist or instructor is cautioned that he must first gain the patient's confidence and cooperation, and at all costs avoid any air of superiority or dogmatic statements, just like an AA sponsor. AA's big book promises the reader that there should be no holier-than-thou attitude, no lectures to be endured. Richard Peabody was Baylor's most famous patient. He was a son of a well-known Boston family and came also to the Emmanuel Church for help with his alcoholism in 1922, and he worked with Courtney Baylor. Richard Peabody attended the Emmanuel Church's clinic and weekly health classes in the winter of 1921-22, and by 1924, he was listed as one of its publications as a volunteer assistant in the social service department. Sometimes during the 1920s, he established his own office on Newbury Street in Boston. He started working with alcoholics also, And although he was not a doctor, people started calling him Dr. Peabody. He wrote a book. The book is called The Common Sense of Drinking, and he wrote it in 1931. This book was a favorite book of Bill Wilson and Dr. Silkworth. Both of them read this book. And so this was, and they took things from this book. The idea of lay therapists, of one alcoholic helping another alcoholic, and also the idea that there in yellow, you can see it says Dr. Peabody was it. This is Bill Wilson talking in his book. He wrote, Dr. Peabody was, as far as is known, the first authority to state, once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic, and he proved it by returning to drinking. So this was something that Bill got out of alcoholic, out of the book, The Common Sense of Drinking by Richard Peabody. Actually, Peabody wrote, once a drunk, always a drunk, but Bill changed it to once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. There's also another phrase in the book that's called half measures will avail you nothing, which in English in our book is called Half Measures Availed Us Nothing. So this was a book that early AA people read. The biography of Peabody says that he became drunk again in 1941. So being a doctor, being a therapist for money didn't keep him sober. He worked with a lot of alcoholics and helped a lot, but he did not stay sober. And actually, one of the causes of his death when he died was listed as chronic alcoholism. Just because we know something, that won't keep us sober. In 1909, the Jacoby Club was something else launched, started by the Emmanuel Church, and it was started by a man named Ernest Jacoby. He organized what he called men meetings in the church's basement. They were originally designed as informal meetings to help people who were affected by drinking problems to meet and help each other. Very similar to AA. The group grew rapidly and separated from the Emmanuel movement in 1913. And it also helped other men and put a special emphasis on fellowship as a path to recovery, just like Alcoholics Anonymous. By 1912, the club announced that it had already accomplished results beyond our farthest hopes. In 1940, a man by the name of Paddy Keegan came to Boston to start the first AA group, and he started off in the Jacoby Club and then eventually started an AA meeting. This was, the Jacoby Club was men helping men. The little AA group that Paddy started did not seek its own quarters until July 41, and it was connected with the Jacoby Club for a while. It was this point in May 1942 that a Boston businessman named Richmond Walker came to his first AA meeting and got sober. 6 years later, in 1948, Richmond Walker published on his own a little AA meditational book. I don't know if you have it or use it. It's very popular all over the world in AA. It's called the 24 Hours a Day book. And that became the second, Richmond Walker became the second best-selling author after Bill Wilson. The 24 Hours a Day book, of course, became very popular. Richmond Walker had been educated in the same, there's a picture of the 24 Hour a Day book. Richmond had been educated in the same mix of ideas in Boston that produced the Emmanuel movement and the Jacoby Club. And A.A. old-timers who first introduced him to the program, most of them had started out in the Jacoby Club. So in his book, 24 Hours a Day, Richmond stressed the same three central necessities for recovery: spirituality, re-educating our subconscious minds, and drawing on the healing power of fellowship among Alcoholics Anonymous. The real influences on Richmond Walker's meditational book came from the Jacoby Club, the Oxford Group, New Thought, 19th century interpretations of Kant and Plato, and of course, above all, the early AA tradition itself. The book was written in 1948 and published by Richmond Walker on his own. He spoke of the mind's descent into the divine abyss. Richmond changed, made it a generic book that was not as Christian oriented. It was oriented toward a higher power instead of a specific religion or denomination. And he learned this technique from the teachings of the great Hindu philosophers, but it represented the same kind of meditational experience which was cultivated by the Christian theologians and the early Christian theologians. He would have been introduced to these, Richmond Walker would have been introduced to these Hindu philosophical ideas during his college days. He studied German and a lot of other languages, and he learned a lot of this, of comparative religion in college. His knowledge of Hinduism may also have been mediated in whole by Ralph Waldo Emerson, an American writer, and New England transcendentalists who obtained copies of the Bhagavad Gita and Vishnu Purana in 1845, the Upanishads and Vedic Samhitas in 1850, and the Shakuntala of Kalidasa in 1855. As a matter of fact, Richmond Walker put a quotation from a Sanskrit work in the very beginning of his book. The 24-hour book is a beautiful translation of a Sanskrit writing that says, "Look to this day, for it is life, the very life of life. In its brief course lie all the realities and verities of existence, the bliss of growth, the splendor of action, the glory of power. For yesterday is but a dream, and tomorrow is only a vision. But today, well lived, makes every yesterday a dream of happiness, and every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day, one day at a time." Also, another influence was the American philosopher William James. His father was a Swedenborgian theologian, a Christian sect, and he wrote a lot. He studied art and geology, and his most famous book, of course, is called The Varieties of Religious Experience. The advice of Carl Jung had been transmitted to us of AA by way of two people, Roland Hazard and Bill Wilson. The substance of the advice, as reported in Bill Wilson's writing, is reminiscent of William James's view on conversion. He wrote a lot about conversion, a new awakening, a new life, a new experience. And he talked about in his book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, he talked about the varieties of religious experience, how people change because of their some experience that they have. He wrote this two-volume Principles of Psychology. He was also a pragmatist, which was also what Bill Wilson was. Bill Wilson always believed that you try something, and if it works, it's good. If it doesn't work, you throw it away and try something else. William James regards only the most dramatic experiences of the transcendent as of religious interest. But these experiences, religious or spiritual, that change a person's life. That's what William James was talking about in his book, The Varieties of Religious Experience. In the white letter there, it says spiritual experiences, James thought, could transform people. Some were sudden, others came on gradually. Some flowed out of religious channels, others did not. But nearly all had the common denominations of pain, suffering, and calamity, which we have all had. Complete hopelessness and deflation at depth were almost always required to make the person ready. And then again, further down in white letter, there had to be a complete failure of the will in a certain part of one's life. With the alcoholic, it was the control of alcohol. There had to be an admission of failure. There must be a cry for help. If you'll remember that Bill Wilson, of course, had gone down, down, down with his drinking. And he was at the last time in Towns Hospital, and he had given up. Bill said, the terrifying darkness had become complete. For a brief moment, I suppose the last trace of obstinacy was crushed out as the abyss yawned. I remember saying to myself, I'll do anything, anything at all. If there be a great physician, I'll call on him. Then with neither faith nor hope, I cried out, if there be a God, let him show himself. The effect was instant, electric. Suddenly my room blazed with an indescribably white light. I was seized with an ecstasy beyond description. So he had this white light experience. And then shortly after that, E.e.య brought him a book. And the book was The Varieties of Religious Experience. And Bill says, the moment E.e.య left, I picked up the book and commenced to read. The title, The Varieties of Religious Experience by William James, was called by some the father of modern psychology. The book was not easy reading, but I kept at it all day. By nightfall, this Harvard professor, William James, long in his grave, had, without anyone knowing it, become a founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. So Bill even said that William James, in his way, was a founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. William James talks about something that most of us in AA can relate to. He talks about the religion of the once born and the twice born. Those of us who have died to an old life and have been reborn with a new life. There is the religion of the once born, people that never really have a whole lot of problems in life. They just take life as it comes. And then those of us who have hit a bottom and had some kind of change in our life, we were born again. William James said that the greatest revolution of our generation is the discovery that human beings, by changing inner attitudes of their minds, can change the outer aspects of their lives. Now, besides William James and the Emmanuel movement, there's something called New Thought. New Thought is a spiritual movement, sometimes classed as a Christian denomination, but it's not really. It developed in the United States in the 19th century, following the teachings of Phineas Quimby. It is a mind-healing movement based on religious and metaphysical suppositions. It's the power of positive thinking. It's keeping positive and helping ourselves and others to become better. The New Thought person was to be free from the principles of a declared belief, instead being in touch with the omnipresent, indwelling presence of God. No religion, no dogma, nothing. You don't have to believe anything, but to have some kind of experience with a higher power. Some of these had churches that were called religious science or One extreme answer to the problem of pain and suffering was given in the New Thought movement, which had a great influence on many of the Protestants in early AA. These New Thought authors taught that pain and suffering were fundamentally produced not by external conditions, but by wrong thinking. You know, in AA, we say, we came for our drinking, but we stayed for our thinking. That's where our problem is. Not the external conditions, not him or her or my job or my boss, but it's the way that I think about these things. This was a group of American and British teachers, preachers, writers, and healers, including these people, particularly a man by the name of James Allen, who wrote a book, As a Man Thinketh, which is is almost non-theistic and non-religious, but very Buddhist philosophy. And the influence of Hinduism and the doctrine of karma. The New Thought movement was deeply influenced in its earliest stages by the world of Asian religions, Hindu Vedanta thought, and especially in James Allen's case, by Buddhism as well. They believed that the phenomenal world external to our minds was a form of what the Hindu tradition called Maya. That is, they held that the material world around us was simply an illusion, a screen of false and unreal things, which blocked us from the knowledge of the transcendental Godhead. Further down there in white letter, it says, New Thought spiritually taught us that we captives of the world illusion be freed from the chains of karma by learning how to see through the illusion and discover its falsity. You know, the idea of karma, you know, on page 62 of the big book in English that I have anyway, it talks about we caused our own problems. That's page 133, with selfishness and self-centeredness. And these were the cause of our problems. You know, it wasn't my boss or my wife or somebody else. It was me that caused my problems. And the consequences are, I pay with the consequences. So anyway, Emmett Fox was very important to early AA people. His most famous book, The Sermon on the Mount, was published in 1934. And the book was of special interest as the Oxford group had adopted 4 basic points. New Thought and Emmett Fox, as AA developed, New Thought took the place of the Oxford group. As we left the Oxford group, we came more and more to read New Thought ideas like Emmett Fox. Emmett Fox was originally from Ireland. He studied in England. He came to the U.S. and he had the Church of the Healing Christ, or Divine Science, and he had talks that he gave in the Hippodrome in New York. The Hippodrome is this enormous place in New York where they had circuses and everything. He would talk in this place, and he would fill up the place when he talked about New Thought and his ideas and talk. Early AA members went to Emmett Fox's talks in New York City. So he was very influential to early AA. That what we need is the divine spark. He talks about true spiritual and bodily health can be obtained by contact with God through the divine spark within us. Dr. Fox declared yesterday in a sermon before the congregation of the First Church of Divine Science, which met in the Hippodrome. Mel B. Wrote a lot for the Grapevine. He died with, I believe, 60-some years of sobriety just about 5 years ago. He says, I've long believed that some of my best spiritual help has come from reading the books of Emmett Fox, especially the Sermon on the Mount. I also learned in a brief discussion with Bill that he and the other pioneer A.A.s attended Emmett Fox's lectures in New York in the late 1930s and benefited from them. Another place was in Akron, where they didn't jump up and down about the big book. They weren't real excited about the big book when it came out. And Dr. Bob didn't think it was really the best thing for common people. And he had someone write this. It was called a manual for Alcoholics Anonymous. And it kind of explained a little of how to get sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. It was a little simpler than reading the big book. The newer literature, this was emphasizing the importance of new thought ideas. There was a suggested reading list in this pamphlet called the Akron Manual. And the reading list had the reading, of course, read the book, big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, the Jewish and Christian Bible, books like The Greatest Thing in the World, My Unchanging Friend, As a Man Thinketh, the Sermon on the Mount. These were recommended readings for early AA members. As a Man Thinketh, the very non-theistic, almost Buddhist book that was recommended, talked about a lot of things. A man is what he thinks. Man creates all the circumstances of his life through thought. The mind must be treated as a garden, and man must learn to identify and remove the weeds. We must, and a lot of AA's core ideas in the early days came from this book and other new thought ideas. By training, a man of weak thoughts can make them strong, exercising himself in right thinking. That's talking about helping our thinking. The outer conditions can be found to become harmoniously related. I recommend this book, As a Man Thinketh, a lot. It's a very easy to read, short book. The more tranquil or serene becomes a man, his success, his influence for power for good. Because we all know, as the big book says, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind. That's where my problem is. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the Oxford Group and Frank Buchman. The founder of the Oxford Group movement, Oxford Group, a Christian evangelical movement and the birthplace of A.A., Frank Nathaniel Daniel Buchman, was born in a small town in Pennsburg, Pennsylvania, on June 4th, 1878, 14 months earlier than A.A.'s future co-founder, Bob Smith. It was a small German-speaking town, very conservative, where the only permissible vice was overeating. So he moved to Muhlenberg College and Mount Airy Seminary, and he was ordained a Lutheran minister in 1902. He thought he was really smart and thought that they should give him a really important church to be the pastor of. He was ambitious and had aspirations of being called to an important city church, but instead he was offered an unprestigious posting in a Pennsylvania suburb. He got a little church. He wanted a big church, and but he got a little church, and he had some arguments with the people who the board of directors of the church. But within 3 years, he'd built up the vigor and life of the church and had established a hospice for young men. But differences over finances arose between him and the official board of the hospice, and he resigned his position. Exhausted and depressed, Buchman embarked on an extensive holiday abroad, paid for by his parents. Seething with resentment over his unjust treatment at the hands of bureaucrats, So here he was, full of resentments at how these bureaucrats had treated him. So he went on vacation, paid for by his parents, went over to Europe. The Keswick Convention was established in 1875, and its aim was to help those wanting to know God better and to live godly Christian lives. The Keswick Convention is an annual gathering of evangelical Christians in Keswick in the English county of Cumbria. And this is where Bookman had his own spiritual experience. There are just some pictures of Bookman in Oxford, actually, in 1934. And this is what they called a house party. 6,000 people at an Oxford group in Oxford. And there's one in Denmark, the people inside the castle there, thousands and thousands of people. He traveled all over the world from China. Here's Bookman on the left with the leader of the Socialist Party of India. He was acquainted with Nehru in Delhi. This is a later picture from 1952, and he actually addressed members of both houses of India's parliament. He went all over the world. He was trying to save the world. One of the things that Bill Wilson said was that the Oxford group wanted to save the world, and I just wanted to save the drunks. In this little church is where Bookman had his little spiritual experience in this chapel, where he resembled there with the highlighted in red. I think you'll see some A.A. there. Bookman said, I thought of those 6 men back in Philadelphia who I felt had wronged me. They probably had, but I got so mixed in the wrong that I was the 7th wrong man. I was the center of my own life. That big I had to be crossed out. I saw my resentments against these men standing like tombstones in my heart. I asked God to change me, and he told me to put things right with them. It produced in me a vibrant feeling as though a strong current of life had suddenly been poured into me. And afterward, a dazed sense of a great spiritual shaking up. So he made restitution and apologized to those people that he had resentments with, and took ownership of his own prideful behavior. The Oxford group had a lot of sayings and a lot of little lists of things. They had, for example, the 5 procedures. It's a formalized Oxford plan of action. The 5 procedures were: give in to God, listen to God's direction, check guidance, check with somebody else about what you think God told you, make restitution, and then sharing. And sharing was for 2 reasons. One was for witness, which is what we do in our meetings. We talk about, with a newcomer. We share our experience, strength, and forth. But also sharing was for confession, which eventually evolved into our 5th step. It's quite obvious that the bulk of what is in our steps is present here. The 5 procedures are clearly seen in A.A.'s process of transformation. The 2 other A.A. practices present in the Oxford group were the insistence that its workers, and especially its founder, never be paid for the soul surgery, is what they called it, of helping others to attain a changed life. That's what the Oxford group tried to do, help others to change. And they had an obligation to engage in personal work with others in order to change the helpers' lives. You help others so that you can be helped. Another A.A. principle. The Oxford group operated under 6 basic assumptions. Men are sinners. Men can be changed. Confession is a prerequisite to change. The changed soul has direct access to God. And the age of miracles has returned. Those who have been changed must change others. A lot of A.A. in this. Then, of course, in Akron, there was Dr. Bob and the four absolutes of the Oxford group. Dr. Bob said that in 1948, shortly before he died, he said the only AA yardsticks to measure ourselves in AA in the early days before the 12 steps were the four absolutes. And the four absolutes, of course, were absolute honesty, absolute unselfishness, absolute love, and absolute purity. And the problem was the word absolute. You know, Bill said one time, he said, the drunks didn't want to be absolutely anything except absolutely drunk. He said absolute was difficult. Another series about studying these are books about the Oxford group. For Sinners Only, What is the Oxford group? I Was a Pagan, and the 8 points of the Oxford group. Different people in the Oxford group wrote books. The Oxford group itself did not write any books. But here's something that they talked about in the book called What is the Oxford Group? Quote, "It is a simple decision put into simple language. This sounds like our third step. Spoken aloud to God in front of a witness at any time and in any place that we have decided to forget the past in God and to give our future into his keeping. Nothing more need be added. Nothing can be taken away." This was what they called surrender. The Oxford group talked about surrender all the time. It was a main principle of the Oxford group. This is one reason why Bill Wilson does not use the word surrender in the big book. You will not find the word surrender in the big book, the first 164 pages of the big book, because Bill did not want people to think that AA was affiliated with the Oxford group. Again, they had this practical program of action, the surrender of our life, past, present, and future, sharing of our sins and temptations with another Christian. 3, restitution to all whom we have wronged. And then continuance, which is listening and accepting and relying on God's guidance. They also had what they called the 5 C's. Confidence. We have to gain a person's confidence if we're going to work with them. Confession, admission of sins to God and another person. Conviction, becoming aware of one's sinfulness. Conversion, giving oneself to God. And continuance, fellowship and witness to others. Out in Akron in 1931, of course, in 31, The Common Sense of Drinking by Richard Peabody had been published. And his book was out there. And Russell Bud Firestone, there in the bottom right, he was the alcoholic son of Akron businessman Harvey Firestone Jr., like in Firestone Tires. He was introduced to Sam Shoemaker by James Newton while returning from Bud was a drinker. He was drinking a 1/5 of whiskey a day, and he couldn't stop. And he met with Sam Shoemaker of the Oxford group, and he stopped drinking for a while anyway. And these are some of the early people in the Oxford group in Akron. Well, after the Oxford group and Bookman helped Firestone's son get sober, Firestone was very grateful. And so he sponsored an Oxford group conference at the Mayflower Hotel in Akron in 1933. So they had this big Oxford group conference there in Akron. Some of the attendees were Henrietta Seiberling, T. Henry and Clarice Williams, and Dr. Bob's wife, Anne. So she went to that conference. She said, well, maybe this can help my husband. The group profoundly attracted Anne Smith, who dragged her recalcitrant husband, Dr. Bob, to this altar of potential redemption. And despite his original antipathy, and this is from Dr. Bob's Nightmare from the Big Book. He said, I liked the Oxford group folks. They were nice, and they spoke with great freedom from embarrassment. And I studied and I did what they told me to do, but I still got drunk every night anyway. And he says, my wife became deeply interested. And they had meetings at the home of this couple, T. Henry and Clarice Williams, there in Akron. They had meetings at their house. And of course, that's Ann Smith, who got Bob to start going there, and he liked it, but he still kept drinking. Bill Wilson said that there were positives and negatives of the Oxford group. He said, we owe them a double debt. They taught us what to do and what not to do. The alcoholics used the Oxford group methods as a way to solve their own specific issues, including the vital, we admitted we were licked and we were powerless over alcohol. And yet A.A. broke away, New York in 37 and Akron in 39. The best analysis of the positives and negatives of the Oxford A.A. relationship can be found by the A.A. historian Ernie Kurtz. One, he said, A.A. avoided absolutes. Two, A.A. avoided aggressive evangelism, and they were very Christian evangelists, the Oxford group. And number three, A.A. embraced anonymity. And the Oxford group, they wanted celebrities. They wanted stars and rich people and famous people. That's who they wanted. And A.A. also tried to avoid anything that would offend anyone. We don't want to keep anyone out. We don't want to be too strict. So the early debt, yeah, there's a picture. She was a very famous star in the U.S. And that's Frank Bookman and Mae West. We owe a great debt to the Oxford folks. Self-examination, the inventory of character defects, and the use of slogans. Oxford group had slogans like our Easy Does It and things. Study men, not books. Give news, not views. But A.A. eventually, because of other reasons, distanced itself. One of the things was Bookman became friends with Henry Ford. Of course, they invented the Ford. But Henry Ford was a racist and a Nazi sympathizer. And Henry Ford was a very good friend of Bookman. In fact, Frank Bookman received a medal from the German government. He received it at the embassy, the German embassy in New Delhi, after the war. They had to wait until after the war to give him his Grand Cross from Germany. Henry Ford also receiving German honors in 1938 for his anti-Semitism. And this was bad publicity for A.A. And Frank Bookman and the Oxford group was working a lot in Germany. They even tried to get a meeting with Hitler. They did meet with some of the higher German generals and leaders there. But Bookman said, well, if I can convert Hitler, then everything will be fine. One of the biggest issues with the Oxford group, was Bookman made a statement. He said, "Thank heavens for Hitler." He said, "I thank heaven for a man like Adolf Hitler, who built a front line of defense against the Antichrist of communism." And that phrase was so much bad publicity. And in the US, it was really bad publicity, saying that Hitler was just a good guy because he was against communism. And so the Oxford Group changed its name to MRA. And Bookman himself had some bad personal publicity. He tended to yell and scream at some of his people, and he enjoyed the rich life, hanging around with rich and famous people. And so a lot of these things were very negative in the press, and A.A. didn't want to be associated with it. Here, just for your interest, it's just a couple of minutes. This is a house party in New York. A.A. Bill Wilson broke away from the Oxford Group in 1937. This is a little short film of an Oxford Group house party in Birmingham, England in 1937.
Sauron no necesita un ejército.
¡No!
Sino anillos.
Estos anillos pueden hacer que obtenga poder.
¡Luchen conmigo!
¡Luchen! ¡Con nuestros amigos!
Sorry, here we go.
Heading towards Birmingham come 2,000 young men from 23 nations to conquer the world for God and Dr. Frank Buckman's Oxford Group. Some people call the Oxford Group a new religion. Others, less tolerant, call it just a pleasant way of spending the bank holiday weekend. But so much interest and enthusiasm is being aroused by this new movement that we are presenting these pictures of the group's Birmingham house party, as it's called. At 6 a.m., the entire party leaps out of bed, goes for a run, takes exercises to clear mind and soul for the day. At 7 a.m. comes breakfast, and plenty of it. For good food means health, and health is one of the basic rules of the Oxford Group. Then there's marching and parading, with every member of the party organized into youth brigades. But the main business of the day takes place in the British Industries Fair Hall, where the 2,000 groupers sit on mats on the floor and listen to speeches. Mostly they are middle-class youths, clerks, college boys and workers who have found their careers inadequate without the Oxford Group. The main thing they learn is the importance of God control in daily life. But as this is also coronation year, some of the time is spent in drawing up a loyal address to their Majesties the King and Queen. And with the leader carrying the address in front of a panoply of waving flags, comes the march to the post office to post it. Whatever part the Oxford Group is destined to play in the national life, few can deny that this Birmingham party is one of the biggest spiritual gatherings of the century.
So that was an Oxford Group house party in 1937. I don't know, for some reason it doesn't want to. I didn't have this problem before. Sorry.
U.S. citizen, you can vote from here, and even here. Using an absentee ballot, Americans who are traveling or living abroad have the right to vote from anywhere. Whether by email, postal mail, or by dropping your ballot off at a U.S. embassy or consulate, make sure you don't miss the next election. Request your ballot today.
Sorry. There we go. All right. Sorry, I have to. I don't know what that is. There we go. I apologize. I didn't have that problem before. And now I'm going to have to go all the way back down. I practiced this morning and I didn't have this problem, so sorry. Nope, I'm going to have to. Again, I apologize. I just have to, I have to do it this way or it won't work. There we go. Again, I'm sorry. Anyway, so in 1937, New York and Bill Wilson, they break with the Oxford group, or was it vice versa? This was a situation where the Oxford group complained to Bill and Lois because they were having a drunks only meeting at their home. And the Calvary Church didn't like that. And so they said, they told the drunks at the Calvary Mission, don't go to Bill's meetings anymore. And they sent a letter to Bill. And so Bill, you know, it's a question of, you can't fire me, I quit. And so in late 1937, leaders of the Oxford group at the Calvary Mission ordered alcoholics staying there not to attend meetings at Bill's house. Bill and Lois were criticized by the Oxford group members for having drunks-only meetings at their home. The Wilsons were described as not maximum, an Oxford group term for those who were not perfect. In August, Bill and Lois stopped attending Oxford group meetings. The New York AA separated from the Oxford group, and it was renamed Moral Rearmament in 1938. Primarily, we believe, because of a lot of the bad press with Hitler. Bill Wilson, they asked Bill, what did AA learn from the Oxford group and why did we leave them? And Bill said, AA's first step was derived largely from my own physician, Dr. Silkworth, and my sponsor, E..eya, and his Oxford group friend, Roland Hazard. The rest of the 12 steps directly come from the Oxford group teachings that applied specifically to us. Just in white letters, we don't have time for everything. In fairness, it should also be said that many of their attitudes of the Oxford group did not work well at all for us alcoholics. These were rejected one by one, and finally we withdrew from the society. Some of the Oxford group ideas just didn't work for alcoholics. Bill says, to begin with, the climate of undertaking was not well suited to alcoholics. They were aggressively evangelical. They sought to revitalize the Christian message in such a way as to change the world. Again, in white letters, my reason for some of its terminology and exertion of huge pressure, the Oxford group set a moral stride that was too fast, particularly for our newer alcoholics. You have to be absolutely honest by next Thursday. You know, there was a lot of pressure to be perfect. The Oxford groups created the feeling that one had to arrive at the destinations in short order. They also believed that by converting prominent people to their beliefs, they would hasten the salvation of many who were then less prominent. And the Oxford group had attitudes and practices which added up to highly coercive authority. And we drunks just don't like authority. And the idea of guidance, we use that in AA sometimes, that we ask for guidance. What should I do in this particular situation? We ask for intuition, a thought, and but in the Oxford group, they asked for guidance for other people. And so, I might feel some guidance, some idea that I should tell you what to do. Well, that doesn't go over very well with drunks. Anyway, Sam Shoemaker had met Frank Buchman in China and became actually the Oxford group representative in the United States. Sam Shoemaker did for the Oxford group. In 1955, Bill Wilson even gave credit to Sam Shoemaker as a co-founder of AA. He was an Episcopal priest, and Sam said that everybody has a problem, is a problem, or has to live with a problem. In 1917, Sam Shoemaker had been sent to China to start a branch of the YMCA and to teach at the Princeton in China program. There in 1918, feeling discouraged, he met Frank Buchman, who told him of the four absolutes: honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love. There'd been a lot of material written on Frank Buchman's influence on AA and the 12 steps in general. But this is more to do with 12-step connection to the Oxford group in its infancy. Most of the influence from the Oxford group came by way of Sam Shoemaker, not Buchman. There's no information that says that Buchman really had any direct contact with any AA people. Sam Shoemaker would work with Buchman after he met him for 20 years as the American head of the Oxford group movement. He was Episcopalian minister at Calvary Mission in New York. Calvary Church ran the Calvary Mission. Of course, E.e.y stayed at the Calvary Mission. By this time, Roland Hazard, remember him? Roland Hazard was also a member of Calvary Church in New York. Encouraged by Ebby Thatcher and other Oxford group members, Bill Wilson got out of Towns Hospital. He visited Dr. Shoemaker at Calvary Mission and made a decision to become very active in the missions and try to bring other alcoholics from Towns Hospital to the Oxford group. So Bill got out of the hospital after his spiritual experience, started going to the Oxford group, and he would go to Towns Hospital and to the Calvary Mission to get drunks and try and sober them up in the Oxford group. Bill would later say that the early AA got its ideas of self-examination, acknowledgement of character defects, restitution for harm done, and working with others straight from the Oxford group and directly from Sam Shoemaker, their former leader in America, and from nowhere else. In 25 is when Sam became rector of Calvary Episcopal Church in New York City. And on February 1st, Samuel Hopkins Hadley's son, Henry, joined Sam Shoemaker to establish the rescue mission. That's a picture of the church there. And they had a rescue mission. That's a picture of the rescue mission there. And Sam, we've been talking, Sam Shoemaker thought a lot about Alcoholics Anonymous. He thought very highly of alcoholics. He said, we've been talking about what Alcoholics Anonymous has learned from the church, and now what the church has to learn from Alcoholics Anonymous. And this was written by Sam Shoemaker in a talk that he gave at the AA convention in St. Louis, Missouri. He said, the first thing I think the church needs to learn from AA is that nobody gets anywhere until he recognizes a clearly defined need. These people do not come to AA to get made a little better. They do not come because the best people are doing it. They come because they are desperate. They are not ladies and gentlemen looking for a religion. They are utterly desperate men and women in search of redemption. Sam said the second thing the church needs to learn from A.A. is that men are redeemed in a life-changing fellowship. That's what A.A. has, a life-changing fellowship. A.A. does not expect to let anybody who comes in stay the way they are. And one A.A. would say that he could go to a veterans meeting, a social club, go to his church, and if he didn't go, nobody'd say anything. But if he missed an A.A. meeting, somebody would call him. The third thing the church needs to learn from A.A. is the necessity for definite personal dealing with people. That's what we do. One-on-one, one alcoholic helping another alcoholic. The fourth thing the church needs to learn is the necessity for a real change of heart, a true conversion. We change. In thousands of places, alcoholics and others can go and hear recovered alcoholics speak about their experiences and watch the process of a new life take place before their eyes. This was Sam Shoemaker talking about what happens in A.A. Bill W. once wrote in the A.A. Grapevine that Dr. Sam Shoemaker was one of A.A.'s indispensables. Had it not been for his ministry to us in our early time, our fellowship would not be in existence today. His help for A.A. was tangible even before the fellowship began to exist. As the head of Calvary Church, Sam built Calvary House, which served as a hostel where Ebby Thatcher, stayed for a time. Sam also ran Calvary Mission, a place for the down and out, which Bill visited in 1934. This is just a picture nowadays of what Calvary Church looks like. There's a picture of Sam Shoemaker on the right there. There are actually some stained glass windows in the church. You may be able to see there on the bottom of the stained glass windows, it says, "In memory of Roland Hazard." His family had stained glass windows made for the church in memory of Roland Hazard. And then it says, "There came next to the lectern a figure not many A.A.s had seen before, Sam Shoemaker. It was from him that Dr. Bob and I," Bill says, "in the beginning had absorbed most of the principles that were afterward embodied in the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, steps that express the heart of A.A.'s way of life. Dr. Silkworth gave us the needed knowledge of our illness, but Sam Shoemaker had given us the concrete knowledge of what we could do about it. One showed us the mysteries of the lock that held us in prison. The other passed on the spiritual keys by which we were liberated. The close association of early A.A. to the Oxford group ensured Sam's association with the fellowship and Bill. Initially, he was unhappy with the decision by Bill and other alcoholics to hold meetings independent of the Oxford group. Later, after Sam left the Oxford group in 1941, he apologized to Bill for the disapproval of the Oxford group and the fact that he gave little encouragement to A.A. Dr. Shoemaker helped A.A. in fundamental ways. Physically, he provided refuge for alcoholics in New York through Calvary Church. Of greater importance was his spiritual aid, which directly influenced the 12 steps and the nature of A.A.'s program of recovery. His long and close friendship with Bill W. provided support to the co-founder and helped the fellowship weather its fledgling years. So that has been a little kind of quick overview of some of these people and the highlights of what came before A.A. and some of the people and organizations that A.A. learned from. I believe that next week we'll probably be talking about writing the big book. And thank you very much for letting me share.